Hello friends, and welcome to the series, the book of Isaiah. And today we are episode number 3, which says, when your world is falling apart. Drawing a memory text from the book of Isaiah chapter 7, verse 9, which says, if you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. Taking us to the first point, the folly of humanity. Humanity, with their finite judgment, find it difficult to discern a friend from an enemy. We are inclined to act on our impulses hastily when hope is lost. In doing so, we often misjudge. A story is told of a lady who had a pet killed by a neighbor's dog, and she was holding this pet, crying, and the other pets judged her to have killed this dead pet. So they tried to avenge on behalf of their fellow pet. Whenever they met Connie, they would often pinch Connie hardly. So Judah as a nation also misjudged. Taking me to the second point. Isaiah chapter 7 verses 1 to 9. The Assyrians embarked on a warpath to expand their power or territory. 2 Kings chapter 16 verses 3 to 9. 2 Chronicles chapter 28 verses 2 to 4 and verse 16. Syria and Israel, who have had a sour relationship with each other in the past, they teamed up to withstand a greater danger from Assyria. If they could conquer Judah, they could gain more power to fight Assyria. Ahaz, the king of Judah, in his fears, made friends with Assyria instead of making friends with God, so that they would fight Syria and Israel. Taking me to the next point, attempted interception. Isaiah chapter 7 verses 3 to 9. God, who knows the future, foresaw the danger of the alliance between Judah and Assyria. Isaiah was sent to prompt the king about his intention. Isaiah chapter 7 verses 3 to 9. 2 Chronicles chapter 28. God told the prophet to take his son, whose name meant a remnant shall return, to meet with King Ahaz. Thus God spoke to the king figuratively. It was up to him to make his decision. He was to trust the God who promised him victory, or to stick to his own devices. Going to another point, which says another chance. Isaiah chapter 7 verses 10 to 13. Isaiah's first warning to the king went unheeded. The king didn't listen to the warning that Isaiah gave to the king. Esther chapter 5 verse 6, Esther chapter 7 verse 2, and Mark chapter 6 verse 23 talks us about a God of many chances. The God of not only a second chance, but another chance. This God appealed to Isaiah of any sign to authenticate his promise. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 12, Exodus chapter 17 verse 2. God was willing to empty the universe just to win the heart of a wicked king. God makes so many promises in order to win his people. God makes so many tests. God makes so many signs to win his people. But are the people willing to be side or to take side with God? Deuteronomy 6 verse 16. God doesn't want to be tempted, and Ahaz's words seemed to be respectful, but as his word in Malachi 3 verse 10, it was God who bid Ahaz to put him to a test. Going to the next point, sign of a son. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14 talks the same as the following verses. Isaiah chapter 55 verse 9, 1 Chronicles chapter 2 verse 9. The king's refusal to tempt God made God himself to come with a divine sign, a sign of a son who shall be born by a woman, sign of a son who shall be born by a virgin, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. Isaiah chapter 8 verses 1 to 4, Isaiah chapter 7 verse 16, also Judges chapter 6 verse 36 to 40. Many signs were performed in the Old Testament, but this sign of the birth of Christ was not fulfilled in the Old Testament as perceived by many. Some thought it would be Isaiah's wife who would bear a son. Jesus Christ is the son who was born in the New Testament by the Virgin Mary. Let's go to the next point. God with us. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14 again talks the same as Psalms 23 verse 4, Isaiah 43 verse 2. We are not alone, because Emmanuel, which means God with us. And Daniel chapter 3 verse 23 to 25, Genesis chapter 32 verse 24 to 30. To give out its full meaning, the verb to be is added to mean God with us. Just as Jesus, Yehoshua or Joshua, the salvation of the Lord, is translated to mean the Lord is salvation. Acts chapter 7 verse 55, Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3, Christ indeed is with us. Absence of sorrow is not promised, but Christ promised to be with us. Christ is the beloved Son of God. Taking me to the next point, the beloved of God. Jesus Christ is the beloved of God. Emmanuel, God with us, is the light of the world. In him we see the face of God. He was the express image of God in his earthly ministry. He manifested the glory of the Father. Judah and Ahaz rejected God and his promise. He bribed the king of Assyria for help. Flesh shall fall, but God cannot. Lean solely on Jesus Christ, because he alone is the foundation. And in our summary, God brought faithless King Ahaz to circumstances in which he had to make a difficult decision. To believe or not to believe, this is the question. Even though the Lord offered him any sign that his imagination could devise, he refused to allow God to demonstrate a reason why he should believe in him. Instead, he chose as his friend the king of Assyria, King Tiglath-Pileser. May the Lord bless us through this lesson, that we know, that we learn not to stick to our own devices, because we cannot do anything on our own. Philippians chapter 4 verse 13 says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Do you depend on the strength or the power from Christ, or you depend on your own? Do you depend on the ideas from Christ, or you depend on your own? Christ is a friend who is calling on you to lean on him right now. Try him and test him and see if he cannot do the best for you, as he says in Malachi chapter 3. May the Lord bless us as we try to depend on the Lord, as we try to communicate and ask him to show us the way. God bless you.